listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, where we do fast, fun, free daily deep dives into books of the Bible. And right now, we're going through Esther.
Hey everybody, it's Matt. We're talking about eunuchs still, and I know that is not going to be a perfect fit for all of your family discussions today, so this is yet another one of those content warning disclaimers. I mean, it's not going to be like weird or trashy or anything. I mean, come on, we're not doing that, but still, I want to let you pick. I'm a dad, and so I want to be allowed to pick, so I'm letting you pick. There, we have content warning to 3, 2, 1. We are on to our conversation about eunuchs. Part 2. There's an HBO series called Game of Thrones. I don't recommend you watch it. It's absolutely shocking, but it's shocking because the author of that series, George R.R. Martin, draws deeply on all of the ugliest, juiciest bits of Western and really world civilization, including a bunch of themes from the ancient world, like what we're looking at in the book of Esther and during the Persian Empire. Well, in Martin's imagined fantasy world, there's a special, unique class of citizen who gets sent off to guard the frontiers against magical monsters from the great white north. And when they go up there, they forfeit everything in terms of family name, family holdings, having kids, building a dynasty, building a legacy for themselves. And to demonstrate their commitment to this other set of objectives than the normal set of objectives, not only in this fantasy world created by Martin, but also in the real world that we're used to, there is a certain oath that they have to take. And here is the text of that oath they take to join what's called the Night's Watch. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge my life and honor to the Night's Watch for this night and all the nights to come. Very important for me to note that is not me making that pledge. I'm just reading it. I'm not actually going to do any of the things that are on that list. I still want to have a family and everything, and I don't think I want to kill any monsters. Maybe, I don't know. Depends on how bad the monster is. No, probably not. I don't know. The point is, just don't hold me to this. And the other point is, Martin gets human nature. Martin gets human history. This is a very believable thing. And if you were to create a fantasy world based on the world in which we live and the world that's unfolded over time here, you would need to have a class of people who are forced to renounce things like this, because history is full of that kind of stuff. History is also full of people who are physically forced to make such renunciations, including eunuchs, which also exist in Martin's imagined world. Look, in modern times, we have a little different set of motivations because now kind of everybody is a king. Even if you are living in very difficult conditions as you listen to this right now, you are still living in many ways far and away more luxuries and conveniences than even the great King Xerxes had in his heyday. And he was the most powerful person in the world. Technology and the market and innovation it's made every man a king and every woman a queen to some extent by historical standards. And so, yeah, right now it seems like every single hot button issue in the world, if you really distill it all the way down, the thing that seems to be the common thread behind every item of the day is population control, decreasing the amount of people on this planet. So we're living in an era where it's fashionable to at least half, maybe more than half of people in society to cut down on having those babies. Like, we got to do a lot less of that. And at least in my mind, there are a lot of pretty questionable all the way up to reprehensible policies that are fashionable and popular in our day and age to try to make sure we don't end up with too many babies and that we achieve the goals that I guess somebody has for reducing population on the planet. You gotta understand that underlying assumption is present in so many of the things that we think and do in our entertainment and our political assumptions today. Not so at the time of Esther, really not so for the rest of human history. Your legacy, your social security, your welfare, your influence, your strength, your security was rooted in the family that you were able to build. And so everybody, and I mean everybody, was in a place where they're like, hey, may your tribe increase. There's a reason that ancient blessing exists. It's because everybody wanted it. Well, in Martin's fantasy world, as we've been talking about, there was a certain class who was deprived of that objective so that they could be deployed for a different objective. And in the ancient Persian court system, there was also a class of people who were deprived of the opportunity to have that be their chief objective so that they could be set aside for another purpose in society. And in the same way that I think a lot of those policies and practices that we have in our modern world that I think are really morally problematic, in the same way that I find those things to be very troubling and dark, so I find the practice of what was going on to control the eunuchs and to alter their bodies to be enormously problematic. You're talking about just almost indescribable violations of these people's ownership of their own bodies, yet that is what is inflicted upon them. And the Persians were as guilty of this as anybody ever. And some might even look at that and be like, hey, there's a lot of beautiful things about Persia, but the fact that they relied on forced eunuch slave labor to try to make their court system work well and try to keep their palace intact socially, the fact that that boomeranged on them might seem like poetic justice to some of us as we look at it, especially when we actually hear about what happened. And the Greek historian Herodotus tells us a little bit about what happened in Book 8 of the Histories. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm going to read some of it to you. This is troubling. Here Herodotus is writing about Xerxes and his work with Artemisia, the admiral, the female admiral from Halicarnassus, same town that Herodotus is from. And here he writes about the practice that Xerxes' most trusted eunuch engaged in to make more young boys be like himself and to take them into captivity. This is a really dark thing. It's like some of the stuff you hear about how those involved in trafficking will force those who have already been trafficked to help traffic more kids. It says, with these sons, he sent Hermotimus, that's the name of Xerxes' most trusted eunuch, to have charge of them, who was by race of Padassa, and was in the estimation of the king second to none of his eunuchs. Then it goes on to talk about some of the religious practices amongst the Padassians, picking it up here a few lines later. And this man, of all the persons we know up to this time, obtained the greatest revenge for a wrong done to him. For he had been captured by enemies and was being sold, and Panionios, a man of Chios, bought him, who had set himself to gain his livelihood by the most impious practices. For whenever he obtained boys who possessed some beauty, he would make eunuchs of them, and then taking them to Sardis or Ephesus, sold them for large sums of money, since with the barbarians eunuchs are held to be of more value for all matters of trust than those who are not eunuchs. Panionios then, I say, made eunuchs of many others, since by this he got his livelihood, and also of this man. Hermotimus, that again is the trusted eunuch of Xerxes, being not in everything unfortunate, was sent from Sardis to the king with other gifts, and as time went on, he came to be honored more than all the other eunuchs in the sight of Xerxes. So you've got this bleak account of effectively a slave and eunuch trade going on that's being orchestrated and managed by the king's most trusted eunuch. Now, look, you figured this out already, but a lot of these characters in Babylon and Judea and Persia, when they get moved around in exile, they get different names. Daniel had a different name. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had a different name. Esther's Jewish name is Hadassah. They've got old Persian names. They've got Greekified names. So sometimes it's tough to know exactly who we're talking about. And it's possible that this very important eunuch of King Xerxes, who we were just reading about there, is the eunuch who we're reading about in Esther chapter 4, who was the go-between between Esther and Mordecai. My guess is that this eunuch would be second tier, upper echelon, but second tier, but who knows? Maybe it's the eunuch who came up earlier during the contest scene, the one who went by Haggai. I mean, I can almost make that sound like the name of the eunuch that was mentioned in Herodotus. Who it is isn't totally important. That he was is important, and that this trade was going on in the background. everybody would have had opinions about eunuchs and their role in the court and their reliability or lack thereof, and the fact that they were horribly victimized, but also terribly dangerous because of the intrigue and chaos they could wreak, all that would have been swirling around in the minds of the original audience, whereas for you and I, something like this comes up, and in our modern context, we go right to debates about LGBTQ issues or whatever it might be. That is not in view here at all for the original audience, and our very recent modern questions about that should not be inflicted on this text. Some people have made really solid cases for saying that, for example, Nehemiah couldn't have possibly had the role of cupbearer to Artaxerxes without also being a eunuch, because the Persians didn't employ people who weren't eunuchs in those kind of roles. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a valid question to ask. We know that the Babylonians, when they took exiles, when they took young boys to be exiles, they made them eunuchs. So Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, I don't know, but it would have been consistent with Babylonian and Persian practices to have made them eunuchs as well. So for our purposes, I think trying to understand in Esther chapter 4 what the eunuch named Hathach would represent to the original audience is very important. The other thing that I think is really important for our purposes is just to know that this is a character who means something by nature of his physical status, his class in society, and the role he plays, and he is a very sharp instrument. Involving someone in this role takes the stakes of the game way higher in the mind of the original audience, and it puts a whole lot more pressure on Esther right away. Now it sort of feels like Mordecai, by involving a eunuch in this affair, has sort of already lit the fuse on this powder keg. There's really no shutting it off once Mordecai and Hathach have talked. Events are set in motion and cannot be unset in motion. Again, it leads us back to the question, how will Esther respond, and how will Mordecai respond to how Esther responds? Just like when we were wrapping up last time, my apologetic for why I think little side jaunts like this are so important is because we just don't have that many places where we can fill in details and get closer to the original set of assumptions and the original culture that was behind this story. And this is one of the places where we can. Tomorrow, I will try to say almost nothing that horrifies your children and causes conversations that you have to have as a family that you can never take back. All right, thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
Need a Eunucher episode of the 10-minute Bible Hour podcast.